Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Managing editor Brenden Slaughter, joined as always by my recruiting analyst Jared Halus for BeaversEdge.com. Well, folks, it's finally here. The 2021 football schedule officially released. We got a full slate of Beaver football coming back this fall. 12-game schedule. Jared and I will obviously get into it. Some of the highlights right away is, again, 12 games, feature 6 games at home, a couple interesting road matchups, and interestingly enough, the first time that two teams will come to Corvallis for 3 consecutive seasons. Lots of things to get into with the schedule. But Jared, as you saw it drop this morning, the Pac-12 was a little behind the rest of the Power 5. In fact, the last to drop their schedules for this next year, but sometimes save the best for last. Am I right? What were your initial thoughts on the schedule? And we'll get into it, obviously, as it goes.
Yeah, so I set it on the board, and I mean, really right away, I was just like, well, first of all, I thought it was kind of cool to see Purdue on there. I didn't know that was in the books. Thought that was cool. It's a nice game to open the season with. Purdue, while they're definitely a good program, that's certainly a game that I think is winnable, but still would be viewed as a big win. So I think that'd be a great way, and is a great way to get the season kicked off. But in general, I set it on the damn board. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I'm excited to see what they can do.
In case you're just joining us here on the Edge podcast, managing editor Brenden Slaughter, joined by Jared Halus, recruiting analyst for BeaversEdge.com. We're going to get into and break down the 2021 schedule, in detail. As again, I mentioned, up to 12 games. Again, 6 games at Reser Stadium, and 6 games on the road. Jared, right off the bat, how refreshing do you think it is just to see this schedule in place? Obviously, a lot can happen. Last year, we saw the Pac-12 release, I think, 3 schedules before, everything came together. But what does this tell you about, having a full slate of games on the road and, potentially the confidence that the conference and other conferences have that this will be closer resembling to perhaps a normal year?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I always take with me when I do things, and maybe the Pac-12 commissioners and people in places to make these kind of calls, maybe took with them as well, is that you got to prepare for the things you want to prepare for. Like, so even if you've been in a drought for 20 years, but you really need it to rain and you really want it to rain, prepare for the rain. And if the rain comes, then you'll be prepared. So in this scenario, it's like they're preparing for the best. And I think that's super encouraging because, again, there's no real signs at this point in time, at least, that things are really much different, I would say, than they were at this point, or not at this point rather, but when they were making the schedule and about to get into the shortened season last year. It's not like much has really changed. Obviously, we've got vaccinations going out, but for the most part, from what I can tell, and this is probably a very ignorant take because I don't check numbers or anything at all, but I've not heard of any significant decrease in cases. So from what I can tell, things are still the same. But again, you got to prepare for the best. Hopefully, by the time September rolls around, we'll be ready to go, and I think that's what they're planning for as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in the case of the world at large, and specifically the United States at large right now, we've seen across the country that it's largely state dependent, right? And states have kind of made their own choices for it's no different than how we had Oregon that still hasn't had high school football, and other states that did have high school football, just based on how the specific situations and regulations and leadership was in place. So for me, the most exciting thing about this was we're getting the non-conference games back. And that was something that was thrown off the table right away last year, just based on the fact that they knew they couldn't get enough state-to-state ordinance and travel to make everything like that happen. And, in hindsight 2020, who knows how things shook out, probably for the best, but, it is what it is. And for me, when I look at this, Oregon State starts off the year, at Purdue, on the road. That's a marquee game. I mean, it's not, playing at Ohio State or, playing someone even big time. But as far as like it reminds me when they opened at Minnesota a couple years or, several years ago now, just as far as a real good measurement game. You're going into year 4 of the Smith program. And, I mean, we'll get into it obviously more, but yeah, the non-conference games coming back into the fold.
It's a great point.
in the case of Oregon State, you could tell this last year they really missed those non-conference games. You look at that Washington State game, arguably a non-conference game before that game. I'd say the Beavers play a lot better, maybe win that game. So, I think they have their place absolutely, and the non-conference schedule shakes out perfectly, in my opinion, this year.
Yeah, like I said, that's a great take, and certainly something that you look at a schedule and you don't think anything of it until you're like, wait a second, we just came
Right.
a season where there was no non-conference games. So definitely a good thing to point out there. And again, super exciting, and I completely agree. Like I was saying about Purdue, great opportunity there, get the feet wet, and then again in Hawaii, that's another great game that they could win. And we'll go into the games game by game, I imagine. But just looking at it from a outside perspective and from a bird's eye view right now, since it just got released, again, I definitely see some opportunity here for a really good season.
And one thing I wanted to address just before we get into a game by game is we know we're going to get, asked it on the damn board, a lot. And, largely had to do with the news that was announced today. Big news across college football was, Alabama athletic director Greg Byrne came out today and said he expects full capacity at, Alabama Stadium, Bryant-Denny Stadium this year. And, I think that kind of sets the precedent for what normal is going to look like. And a lot of, edgers have already been asking us, hoping for fan attendance. It's obviously a much different scenario here on the West Coast. And as of right now, I still wouldn't rule it out. I think there's plausible opportunity to be able to have everything start to fall in place by then. There's some what ifs and a lot of things have to go right and all that, but by no means would I look at the schedule and say there's no chance of fan attendance, because I don't think that's true.
Yeah, and I don't either. I think so. We did get asked in a mailbag recently if we think there's going to be attendance, and I went ahead and said, yeah, in some capacity, I think there will be, whether it's just families, which I think it'll honestly be more than that. I wouldn't be surprised to see even like 50, 75%, just as long as people are able to maintain a distance. But hey, you never know what can happen in these next few months. This time last year, I probably wouldn't know what coronavirus was if you asked me what it was. We were still a couple weeks away from really it surfacing and it becoming what it was here in the United States. So definitely possible for anything to happen within these next few months, or more than that rather. So it's hard to say right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And specifically to Oregon, I remember the language of the guidance very specifically for when concerts, sporting events could come back, and the language was when that vaccine is readily available. Right. And again, we see conversations pop up on the damn board all the time about vaccines and this and this and that, and I think it's starting to trickle its way in. And, I think Oregon's been a little on the slower end. So a lot of things need to happen in order to kind of, work towards more fan attendance. But bottom line for that, stay tuned. We'll obviously bring whatever, new guidelines come our way. But based on, the things that I'm hearing behind the scenes is that, a lot of, Oregon State, they're planning to at least have fan attendance in some way at the very least. And we'll see what happens. So like Jared said, a lot can happen, but I wouldn't rule out being able to attend games this year by any stretch. So we'll see what happens and go from there. But getting into the schedule itself, the nitty gritty, if you will, Jared, right off the bat, September 4th, playing at Purdue. Just what are your initial impressions on this game? We'll kind of just go rapid fire and just kind of give a couple quick thoughts, and don't need to predict anything this early in the game. But just whatever you think, man.
Yeah, Purdue's again, it's an interesting game because they're a team that's, I think, respected for the most part, especially maybe more outside of their conference probably. So it's a great opportunity, and again, if you lose it, it's not the worst loss in the world, but if you win it, it probably looks a little bit better on your schedule than beating a team like who they'll play the next week. So it's a great opportunity for sure.
Yeah, I just like the opportunity to play a marquee Power 5 opponent on the road. I think, if this was, year one of Jonathan Smith and you're opening at Ohio State, well, we can, that's kind of closing your eyes a little bit. And, the final score reflected that. The program now is in a place where I think they're capable of being able to hold their own going to, I mean, like I'd say, at least a mid-tier program, and being able to, go into a place that I wouldn't say is like extremely difficult to win by any means, and at least being able to put together a solid performance in game one. I mean, again, playing a tough team right off the bat, not a gimme team is hard or not, difficult, but I think this last year, the Beavers played a fellow Pac-12 team right out the gate this year. Maybe they learned some lessons going into next year. So I think a lot of good factors there, but definitely a winnable game. Hawaii coming up next after that. As far as this game goes, I think the Beavers have definitely a little bit of a revenge factor. Coming back to the 2019 season when this was a game that they felt like they should have had, and it would have been the difference between a bowl game and not. Granted, Nick Rolovich, his staff aren't there anymore, but again, not much to say on this. I like Oregon State.
Yeah, I do too. My first thought immediately was back to the same game that you just mentioned as well. And so again, while it'll be a lot of different people on the field, Coach Smith will certainly be letting them know. So it's definitely a great opportunity for sure.
Coming up next, we got Idaho on September 16th, or excuse me, I'm having to zoom in to see the schedule there. September 18th. My apologies there, folks. And again, this is another one of those games that I kind of see as this is the gimme game on the schedule, even more so than Hawaii. No disrespect to Idaho, but we know why Idaho's on the schedule. And if this was maybe the first game, I'd maybe, question a little bit, but by the time third week of action, Oregon State won't struggle in this contest at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. They'll have some experience under their belt, assuming everyone's healthy for the most part at that point. Then I certainly see another win and a strong possibility. Maybe not strong, but a moderately strong possibility to be 3-0 headed into what would be a pretty big game against USC.
Great point, Jared. Did you take my point from the damn board about that?
What did you say?
Exactly that. There is a path to a 3-0 start. I just thought you maybe give me credit for it. That's okay. It's okay, man. It's all good. No, all jokes aside, though, I think it might have been OSU Beef on our board as well that maybe mentioned something along with the start as well. I can't remember the last time on an Oregon State non-conference schedule when I've been able to say confidently that all three games are winnable. Not saying they're going to win, but you look at these three games, all three of those games are winnable.
Yeah,
no
certainly.
question. Now, if you have Ohio State on the schedule or a gauntlet type game where it's a one-off, it's a little bit tougher. Oregon State's played Michigan in the past as well, but Purdue's a really good mid-tier test for this team, and then the other two I think are capable wins at home.
Yeah, absolutely. While we're talking about it, let's pull up USC's schedule real quick. Let's see what they're looking like, and maybe it could be a matchup against two 3-0 teams there. And
yes, as Jared mentions, yes, the Beavers will open at Pac-12 play in the Coliseum September 25th, going up against the Trojans down in Los Angeles. And I'm curious once Jared brings it up, but obviously the Trojans, you just never know what to get with them. They feel like there are times they play really like up to their 5-star talent under Clay Helton, and times they play down to their competition. Historically, the Beavers have always been kind of the spoiler to USC, especially historically, but not so much on the road. I think questioning my Oregon State history, I don't want to say the Beavers have never won in the Coliseum. If not, it might be once. But either way, not exactly the most friendly place for the Beavers historically. Jared, what do you got with the Trojans schedule?
So it's going to be difficult. They've certainly got a harder path to 3-0 than I would say Oregon State does with San Jose State to start their season.
Fighting Brent Brennan's, man. Got to give that former Oregon State connection, Oregon State Southern Campus, I like to call San Jose State.
Then they play Stanford at home, followed by Washington State on the road. So they've got a bit more difficult start, I would say.
No kidding.
So two conference games for them, and then in San Jose State. So I mean, could they do it? 100%. Those are all three, I would say, winnable games too. And to your point, USC is definitely been a roller coaster of a team recently. So it's hard to predict what could happen there. But one thing's for sure is that they've been recruiting much better recently,
Yeah.
much better recently.
Yeah,
So
and take that from the recruiting analyst Jared, and as well as me, USC has been hot lately.
yeah, it's honestly been pretty crazy to see their 2021 class and 2022 even is looking pretty strong. So they're definitely doing the things that you need to do to get to a point where they're consistently winning again. But for now, for this season's sake, I think it's another game that you could definitely put in the winnable category. Again, not going to make a prediction, but it's a winnable game.
Yeah, I see it the same way. I didn't know the USC's schedule coming in. I hadn't specifically looked at it. So knowing that Oregon State's not their conference opener, I think I think that could favor Oregon State. You know, USC might not get quite as hyped up for it as they will. I believe you said Stanford in week 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a game between those two teams. Always a great game when they play earlier in the year. So, you know, we'll see what happens because, yeah, I mean, either way though, again, a game that I think might be there. We'll see how the Trojans play, but bottom line, it is a tough place to play down in the Coliseum, and you know Beavers struggled down there, so I think that'll be a tough game. But we'll see what happens. On to game number 5, Washington coming to Corvallis. Is this the year Jonathan Smith gets his payback towards the Husky program? Hard to say. I mean, this just right off the bat, coming off of USC, Washington, they could have a really, really good team. I think they and Oregon are going to be in the favorites in the North just right off the bat. It's going to be a tough game, even at home.
Yeah. Washington's a good team, and they're certainly probably on the uptrend more so than they were a couple years ago. So I think Oregon State's best chances to beat them may have gone. If you're talking about like matching up against a lesser of a team, could they beat them this year? 100%. I think Oregon State's trending in the same direction. So it's hard to say, but certainly a tough game there against Washington.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that game was extremely close in Seattle this last year, and everything about this last year was just different. So it's kind of hard to take that as a sample size into potentially a normal year. But, they matched up well last year. Beavers could very easily sneak that game in Corvallis as well. So another intriguing matchup. Over to October 9th, Beavers travel up to Pullman to face Nick Rolovich and company. Another frustration game for the Beavers last year. You got to imagine they're maybe going to have this one circled. They're lucky to play in Pullman early in the year. Not going to be a lot of snow, obviously, up there in October. So, again, another very intriguing matchup and another winnable game, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another good contest, and again, like you said, a game that's been close the past couple years. So definitely one that I'm sure Coach Smith and the crew will want to win. So definitely one to watch for sure.
Up next on the schedule, another home game coming up against Utah. Again, another game this last year that really is probably going to stick with the Beavers, as they fell in Salt Lake City, and Jamar Jefferson was not available to them in that game. And again, another real tough one.
Close Utah,
game. Or go ahead, Jared. Sorry.
I was just saying, yeah, close game though.
Yes, absolutely. And, I look at this game as another one where, Utah, very good team usually every year, especially on defense, physical game where you're going to get beat up, just in general. You're going to come out of that game with some bumps and bruises. Anytime I see Utah on the schedule, that's a tough game. I'll just leave it at that. Utah is going to be tough.
Yeah, they're a hard-nosed team, disciplined team. So it's a difficult game, but certainly one again that I'd probably still put in the winnable category. I don't think they're a team that you're like, okay, we've got no chance. I don't think they're at that level. I don't think any team on the schedule is at that level at this point. Maybe a few years ago, but not anymore.
That's a good point.
So while they're a good team, yes, but another game again that Coach Smith's not been able to win yet. So probably one that he's definitely looking at attacking.
That's a great point, Jared. And I don't want to get too far on this tangent, but I just want to illustrate your point because it was such a great one. Not to, kid ourselves or anything. I see the potential for maybe 2 of these teams to be preseason ranked top 25, being Oregon and USC. And that just leads me to believe kind of
maybe Utah.
Yeah, Utah may get in there, and I thought Washington might have a case as well, but maybe Arizona State. But I don't think there may be one. It may be one team, and I just think compared to a couple years ago when Utah was dominant, Washington was dominant. Washington State was at their peak under Mike Leach. Stanford was still rolling under David Shaw. The conference is starting to shift a little bit. I mean, and we'll get into it a little bit later with our second to next opponent, but there are some new faces starting to rise up in the conference, and one of them coming up following that Utah game is going to be Cal. Oregon State now taking 2 straight from Cal. Justin Wilcox and the Cal Bears are going to have this game circled for the reason that I just mentioned. A couple tough losses to Oregon State.
Yeah, I remember talking last year with Timmy Hernandez and like looking at the schedule, and we were talking about Cal, and I was just like, I don't remember if I said it was going to be a win or a loss. At this point, we were close enough to where we were making predictions. But like you said, man, it's definitely a game that it's like it's pretty good when you think about it. I mean, Cal, while they've not been the best they've been recently, still a really great win, especially to have multiple years in a row. So if you can carry that on, and if Oregon State could have a good record heading into this game, maybe this would be the game that's like, okay, we win this, we're bowl eligible, which I could see. I could honestly
Yeah.
see it happening at this point in the season. Then could be a great matchup.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, truthfully, it's kind of interesting, but I got to bring it up just for historical sake. Last time Oregon State went to a bowl game in 2013, started the year 6-1. Actually, let me rephrase. Lost the first game of the year, then won 6 straight to reach bowl eligibility. So, maybe something interesting happens, this year where the Beavers, get to bowl eligibility earlier than normal because I would argue, and we'll get into it, the back half of the schedule is a lot more backloaded than, say, the beginning, where I think there are more opportunities for wins. And, the schedule I do think tightens up, as we just mentioned, matchups against Utah and then Cal. And then to start off November, go on the road to Colorado and Boulder. Again, Oregon State hasn't played Colorado since the, infamous win a couple of years ago in Boulder. But again, another interesting game. Colorado was surprisingly good this last year, and it's hard to know what to make of them coming into this next year. Carl Durrell will be in the second year as the Buffs head coach. Another potentially winnable game. Just kind of chalks up to a lot of these other ones.
Yeah, that's the best way to say it. It's still probably too early at this point to really see. I just mean it in his era at Colorado to see the direction that they're headed in.
Good point.
So, it's definitely a hard one to call, but another one you throw in that winnable category.
Absolutely. Coming in next, Oregon State will return home for the first of 2 home games in a row, take on Stanford. And as I mentioned, Stanford coming to Corvallis. And again, I had to almost just think about this when it came out, because Stanford and Arizona State coming to Corvallis for the 3rd straight season. Do you think those guys want to have Oregon State on their home turf yet? Starting with the Cardinal on the 13th of November. Stanford, not what they once were, but again, I've seen, they've been, on the uptick as far as the recruiting trail recently. And, David Shaw, dean of Pac-12 coaches, that's always a tough game.
Yeah, it's they're a good program, and like you said, they historically recruit pretty well and have been doing all right in that front lately. So definitely a team that you can't really count out of any games they play. And
great point.
Close one for Oregon State last year, and if I'm not mistaken, it's close the year before that as well. So certainly a game that you want to keep an eye on if you're Oregon State. Like you pointed out, the first of 2 straight at home to kind of wrap up the season, which I think is advantageous when you look at it as 2 of their final 3 are at home and 2 of their first 3 are also at home. So I mean, you're playing what a lot of people would argue is super important games, being your first few and your last few. You're playing 4 out of the 6 of them at home. So good looks there, and definitely a good path to victory for Oregon State.
Great point. And coming up after Stanford, Arizona State, as you mentioned, the second of that 2-game homestand. Arizona State, again, I'm just going to say, I get Arizona State beat the Beavers this last year, but typically Arizona State, not a fan of coming up to Oregon in November, just in general. Like that's not their jam. And again, end of November, and obviously Herm Edwards and I think they've got one of the better quarterbacks, if not maybe the best quarterback in the Pac-12. But typically, the Beavers have fared well against Arizona State in Reser Stadium in November.
Yeah, they're a good team for sure. And as you mentioned, JT Daniels, that's Georgia's quarterback. What the heck am I talking about? JT Daniels played at USC. Maybe
Yes.
that's why I got it all confused. But yeah, they've definitely got a great team over there, and Herm Edwards has definitely got them trending up in the right direction. So it's a good game to watch for.
Yeah.
I think in the past I would have said it's I think I remember even saying like, okay, this is a win. This year I'm not too sure I can say that for certain, but certainly another one. Again, there's probably
Right.
you can throw all 12 in the winnable category,
Yeah, you could.
but this is just another one that you got to just wait and
Hey,
see.
Beavers Edge, you heard it here first from Jared Halus. 12
Well,
and 0
no,
for these
well,
Beavers.
no. Hey, I didn't say it, but it's possible. It certainly is possible. There's other teams in the country that have a smaller chance of going 12 and 0 than Oregon State. That's for certain.
Yep, I can't help but think of Jim Carrey. So you're telling me there's a chance, Jared?
There's a chance.
No. So again, Oregon State wraps up. That'll be senior day. Arizona State, and again, a couple things that came to mind right away is that could be a potentially impactful senior day with a lot of people that are wrapping up their college careers and came back, and then it'll be wrapped up November 27th in Eugene against Oregon, where Oregon State is the reigning rivalry game champion. I got a feeling that's going to be a dandy of a game, and we'll obviously predict it as it gets closer. But all in all, for me, the just last thing as far as the 12 games themselves, all 12 games are winnable. That's first thing. Second thing, I think it shakes out very favorably for the Beavers. Third thing, I think there's ideal opportunities to get recruits on the sidelines in Corvallis, potentially when the weather is nice. I look at that Hawaii game, that Idaho game, that Washington game. We obviously don't know what's going to happen with official visits and all that, but optimistically thinking and speaking, if you can get Oregon State's recruits on those sidelines before the weather gets a little bit more gnarly, I think that's always advantageous. So I think that's something that works in their favor too. And then lastly, as Jared mentioned, the way it shakes out with the home and road balance, I think that's very favorable as well. So a lot to like about this schedule. And I'm sure this won't be the only podcast Jared and I do breaking it down between now and September.
No, it certainly won't. We'll definitely start to throw some predictions out there once it gets closer. Once we start to see how the teams are really starting to look roster wise and just everything wise. Once the time gets a little bit sooner, as you said, lots of opportunity here. Personally, I think it's bowl or bust for Oregon State this
Agreed.
year. There's definitely 6 winnable games on this schedule and 6 games that they should win on the schedule. So I'm hopeful for what will happen. As you mentioned, there's just a bunch of great opportunities here. So I'm excited to see how it all will unfold, and where to be when the time comes.
Absolutely. And as Jared mentioned, stick it right here, beaversedge.com. Keep it locked for all your Oregon State stuff. Again, we're got a lot of exciting things coming up. Oregon State baseball in the midst of a very impressive start to the season, and both basketball teams fighting for the postseason, and obviously all the recruiting stuff Jared and I, bring to the table in addition to looking ahead to this next year. So exciting times at beaversedge.com. Make sure to stay locked to Jared and I. And again, thanks for tuning in for this edition of the Edge podcast, breaking down the 2021 schedule.